Good morning, Mr. Gaunt. Could you do a quick sound check for me, please, sir? Mr. Gaunt, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, could you say again, sir?
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfect, thank you, sir. We're live streaming, so I'll let you know when we're ready to start, sir.
Thank you.
That's fine. It's good as well. Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Fred Farias, and I'm the chairman of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Welcome, everyone. Before we call this meeting to order, which is right on time, I would like to announce that on June 1st, 2022, Governor Greg Abbott appointed Georgia Blackwell as the student representative to the board. And welcome, Georgia. And I have appointed her as an ex officio member of the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics. I will formally introduce Georgia at tomorrow's board meeting. But welcome. I would now like to pass the gavel over to Javed Anwar to officially call the meeting of the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics to order. Mr. Anwar.
Thank you, Fred. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, Georgia. My name is S. Javed Anwar. I'm the chair of the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Education Analytics. It is 9:01 a.m. and I would like to call the July 27, 2022 Committee on Innovation, Data, Educational Analytics meeting in order. This meeting is being held via live broadcast. Before I begin, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome and joining us via video conference and ask that you observe the following etiquettes. Please state your name before you speak. Mute your phone when not speaking and keep background noise to minimum. Members, when I call your name, please announce present. Welcome, Wilson.
Present.
Richard Clemmer.
Present.
Fred Farias.
Present.
Robert God.
Present.
Okay. Sam Tone.
Here.
Daniel Wong.
Here.
Georgia Blackwell, student representative.
Here.
Please record in the minute that we have a quorum. I would like to announce the appointment of our new student representative, Miss Georgia Blackwell. Miss Blackwell is from Venus, Texas, and was appointed by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board by Governor Greg Abbott in June 22. Ms. Blackwell is formally introduced at the board meeting tomorrow. Agenda item number 2, consideration possible action to approve the minutes from April 27, 22 committee meeting. Members, do I have a motion to approval of the minutes?
Moved. Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye,
Aye.
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 and those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Agenda item number 3 is the public testimony on agenda items relating to the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics. Do not have anyone registered to testify, so that we can go to the next item, please. Agenda item number 4 is consideration of possible action to approve the consent calendar. The consent calendar includes items that can be approved without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more attention. The consent items are highlighted in the items in gray on the agenda. Of course, any board member can request that an agenda item can be added or removed from the consent calendar. Members, the following items are on the consent calendar for consideration. Agenda item 5B, consideration of possible action to approve 60/30 Texas Progress Report. Agenda item 5G, consideration of possible action to approve the appointment of members to the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. Does anyone want to remove any items from the consent calendar? Are there any other agenda item that wants to be added to the consent? Member, is there any motion to approve this? I need a second.
So moved.
Motion.
Second, please.
Second.
Great. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those who oppose say nay. Motion passes, does not. We move to agenda item 5A is building talent strong Texas data insight credential of value and student depth matrix. Ms. Melissa Henry, Associate Commission for Strategic Partnership, will provide the presentation and be available to answer any questions. Ms. Lori Fay, Deputy Commissioner for Data Analytics and Innovation, and Dr. David Protem, Associate Vice Chancellor of Chief Data Officer of Industrial Research and Advanced Analytics for the Office of Institutional Research and Analytics at the University of Texas, will be available to answer questions. Dr. Protem is joining us today via Zoom. This item is informational only. Melissa, members.
Thank you, Chairman and members. My name is Melissa Henderson, and I serve as the Associate Commissioner for Strategic Partnerships for the agency. I also serve as Executive Director for the Texas Higher Education Foundation. As you know, the board adopted the state's revised strategic plan, Building a Talent Strong Texas, in January of this year, and that plan began to be rolled out earlier this spring. Next slide. Just a quick refresher on the architecture of the plan to ground our discussion this morning. As you know, the plan is centered around 3 pillars: attainment of post-secondary credentials, completion of credentials of value, and research, development, and innovation. And then across those, a focus on equity and ensuring that we are disaggregating the data by race, gender, and income, and on a commitment to collaboration with institutions and other stakeholders across the state in working together to meet these goals. Today, we will be sharing with you baseline data across these refreshed goals, as well as diving a little deeper into the credentials of value measures in particular. Start our discussion with attainment. Next slide. As a reminder, we expanded the attainment goal in two key ways. First, we added an attainment goal for our 35 to 64-year-old population to ensure that while we maintain focus on our young adult Texans, that we're also adding focus on our working age adults. Second, we added the language or other post-secondary credential of value. This is important because it will broaden the scope of the types of credentials that we will be capturing and counting toward this goal beyond the degrees and certificates that we include today and will continue to include. This could include industry-based certifications, stackable micro-credentials, credentials awarded through continuing and executive education, and other credentials that our institutions are awarding today that we aren't currently capturing and including. With regard to the first population, our 25 to 34-year-olds, in 2019, the most recent year for which we have data, 48.2% held a credential. For our 35 to 64-year-olds, 47.7% held a credential. This, by the way, includes certification data that we were able to work with the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce to incorporate. Commissioner, anything you would add here?
Main thing I want to emphasize question about where we are, especially on these going to change partnering with point on standing up a broader range of credentials. And a broader range of what our including on the credit side, the so we'll this is our best estimate. We have additional information.
As we move on to credentials of value, we both want to share the baseline data again, as I mentioned, and spend a little bit of time walking through the methodology at a high level and what we see in the data thus far. Next slide. To start, as you'll recall, we are defining a credential of value as one where the economic benefits exceed the cost to attain the credential. In other words, are you better off within 10 years of having received that credential than you would have been otherwise relative to a high school graduate? As you see in this illustration of the student investment portion of the methodology, we're first looking at, for each semester a student is enrolled, the tuition and fees plus room, board, and other expenses, multiplying that by the time enrolled to be able to account for the difference in students attending full or part-time, and subtracting out aid received to get to the full student investment. We then amortize this investment over 10 years and add it to the earnings for a typical high school graduate, giving us the economic threshold for this credential. If the typical earnings for graduates with this credential exceed that economic threshold within 10 years, then it is considered a credential of value. I realize this is an important concept, so Commissioner, anything you would add there?
So I would distill it to say, are you better off for earning this credential? So considering like what you're going to pay out of pocket and the kind of aid that a typical. So again, we are the first state to goals for producing credentials on the wage premium. So the slide just lays out, here's the basic methodology for what that looks like. And it's important to highlight that it does consider aid that a typical receives on their way to earning that credential.
I got a question. Analysis on the inflation, cost, and enrollment. And question which certainly applies to this, but just inflation running 9 to 10%. obviously there are jobs are just simply, what is the way or how he or the state or whoever address the fact that aid really doesn't change cost because of inflation and could and apparently is having an effect on enrolling or completing.
That's a great question, Mr. Torn, especially because even when tuition doesn't change, a lot of students and their families are feeling the pinch because the cost of living, the other costs of attendance, housing, gone up faster than anyone. So what plans that students and families had made for how much their programs would cost them now, particularly with what's happened in the markets, they're finding there's a gap with college savings. But so a couple of things. One is that we are working with Texas Workforce. We're taking the point on a related project for the Tri-Agency Initiative tomorrow in the major policy conversation, where TWC is in the process of calculating. So what this calculation of a credential of value is more, is there a return on that investment? But then there's a separate question about, well, do you not only end up better off, but where do you sit relative to what I think it will be important as we get those estimates. For credentials. The other place that this will show up is on student debt. So we have, and Victoria and David more, but our institutions, I think, have been, in general, have been good stewards for typical students about how much debt they're completing with. One of the things that we're rolling out the stated institute start to shine a light on and have to work on how they focus their efforts. We do see some troubling patterns of subpopulations we know are low-income students graduating with more debt than good for their credentials. A lot of that's driven by what those additional costs are. So our primary role is going to be shine a light on where there's those issues, and then advocating, especially advocating the legislature to help fill those.
I have a question real quick. In terms of just the student investment, should that kind of like the loan and then the future interest that will include in the student investment in his or her degree, because that's the investment in that degree. So if somebody have a very big loan and then the future interest accumulates such a way that really skew the total student investment into his or her degree totally. So just kind of a little bit.
That's a great segue to our next slide, which is focused on the revised debt goal. So, similarly, with the revised debt goal, we've shifted to an approach that aims for 95% of students graduating with either no undergraduate student debt or manageable student debt in the context of potential earnings. As you see in this illustration, for students graduating with debt, we're looking at their monthly loan payment divided by their estimated earnings, and if the debt-to-income ratio is below 10%, we would consider that manageable debt for the purposes of this measure. So again, taking into account that interest rate. Commissioner, anything you would add on the debt methodology? So we are taking account here of what 5% interest with federal. Also,
our Cal loans or state college access loans. So the primary focus in this calculation is twofold, both so we have a clearer idea of how much debt is too much debt, and that relative to that means who are in engineering programs might be able to take out more debt than students who are in early childhood education programs. But the prospects be able to repay that loan within 10 years and have that debt be manageable, not taking a portion of their income. The other focus of this is students, families, advisors, as they're planning and they're making decisions out. The idea is that we both be monitoring this policy level, encouraging institutions to monitor it, but also to incorporate this measure in our advising.
Excuse me, next slide. So taking us back to the baseline data, to calculate the statewide measure for completion of credentials of value, we're examining again whether the typical student in a program, given typical cost and typical earnings for that credential, is earning more than a typical high school graduate within 10 years. If yes, then at the credential level by program, it is considered a credential of value for the purposes of this measure, and all of the graduates of that program across all public institutions are counted toward the statewide total. Think of this as the potential value that this credential can deliver given typical cost and typical earnings. Good news is that for the typical student across all certificate, associate's, and bachelor's degree programs that we currently capture from our public institutions, they all meet this threshold, and therefore all of their graduates count toward the statewide total for this goal. So for 2019, we had 347,669 completions of credentials of value. At the same time, it's important to note that this is going to look differently when we start to look at it by institution, by program, and by student demographics.
So I just want to underline Melissa's last point. So at a high level, 30,000-foot view, so if we say, well, for a typical student, their earnings is the credential. Now, later in the year, as we start to produce awards, and certainly the award is more detailed views of what's going on, because we see a lot of variation. We see variation. We see variation within variation. So we will, when you disaggregate the data that way, what you'll see is for the same kind of credential, there are some institutions where you see a higher return on that. For the same kind of credential, then you also see variation, though, with and sometimes those variations base to where you see different wage experiences for low-income students with the same kind of. This is important from a policy perspective. It's also really important for our institutions to be able to back. So obviously what we want to see is you want to see narrowing those gaps, not variation. Because of student status coming into a program. So some of that data, just to be candid, is pretty painful. And we will, so we'll be providing detailed dashboards to the institutions. They'll be able to see their data where it's unmasked and very granular data, and also during the year and early. public data dashboard. Policymakers will have. So again, the good news is that at a high level for typical students, typical credentials, the story is pretty good and frankly better than a lot of folks would expect, especially on things like student debt. Bad news is we see a lot of variance. There's going to be a lot of variation there. And by student, that's really going to focus the idea. Focus our energy around student financial aid, as and I were discussing earlier, and other strategies so that we use the variance. Make sure that more students are able to on at least the kind of
Commissioner, I might want to add, after studying the material this past week for base programs, you're exactly right. Look at the variances. The nice things, members, as you there's so much variance, and the nice staff does a good job. Ask the questions. What is your current and I was really surprised at that there's so much variance, but especially tuition wasn't expensive at most of the schools, but you know, when you add all the other costs, the books, it really adds up. But I was really surprised. But as you look at that programs, you can see it. What is your tuition? What are the students paying? Actually, data, solid data, and that way, it's going to be a challenge because of the variance.
And just to reinforce when Mr. Torner brought up, Mr. Chairman, that so if we think about the cost, so cost of attendance, student financial aid, that includes both tuition and so the other related costs, your living expenses, your books, other kinds of materials that you need to program. So even where we're doing a better and better job on the tuition side, the particular challenges on addressing that bigger. And again, see is that there's some particular issues where we have low-income students who are completing their programs with higher debt than like to see for eligible students and high debt, because there's all of these other costs that are associated. Monitor closely, but again, want to work closely with the institute policymakers on so what are the levers we need to pull? Where are the places that we need? So I'll defer to our research team, especially we've got Dr. Troutman on the line. My understanding is that they don't really. So we are done some analyses of a lot of students, for example, they'll go to UTEP. We'll go to El Paso Community College that then end up working or so I don't think we're adjusting the value of those credentials, especially location of where. I'd defer to Dr. Troutman. Maybe.
So, Commissioner, your mic is cutting out, and I couldn't hear Emma at all. So there's some issues with the technology.
Oh, so. I'll hop in quickly. Emma, this methodology is actually based on students connected to their wages in the state of Texas. So it's inherent that the wage premium variation across the state is taken into account. However, as the commissioner says, we're not actually articulating the value of the credential based on any regional characteristics, but the methodology is built from the student level up. And so I think as we do start to dig more deeply into these analyses and start to account or develop ways to account for those variations, it will be interesting. But because it's built from the student level up, we actually are in a position to say, here's what it looks like for the students in this region. There are some gaps that we can talk about at another time that limit the granularity of what we understand about wages. Those are things that we're working on with our partners at TWC to help advance some pilot programs to fill those information gaps. But it is that's one of the interesting things about this approach is that because it's built on actual experience of actual students, including their debt, the time that they were enrolled, the way in which they were enrolled. It's very much, you can disaggregate because you're building from the ground up at the student level, if that makes sense. Does that help?
Is it feasible to track along the way so that if a student, as they take on debt every semester, there's kind of a measure to say, hey, the bell's ringing, you need to, so versus just measure at the end of the day and just say, sorry, you have too much debt.
We can do that. We can also, it's also going to be important to track across institutions. When we look at some of the cumulative debt, like some of the big numbers that are reported include debt from multiple institutions. And so the student might have been enrolled at a private institution. So they've accumulated a lot of or they may have started in a community college, transferred to a university. So we do have pretty good data on student debt where we should be able to track and reflect back information levels of debt that students are accumulating as they navigate. I do think that'll be important.
Building on that, so again, within this area, we also have our revised debt goal aimed at 95% of our students graduating with either no undergraduate debt or manageable debt in context of the potential earnings for that credential. In other words, could a student reasonably pay that debt off within 10 years given typical earnings? Here we find that in 2019, our baseline is 94% of students having completed with no or manageable debt. Again, here too, it's important to keep in mind that this is going to look differently when we break it out by various types of credentials, various programs, institutions, and student demographics. At the end of the day, however, we're talking about just under 8,000 students based on our current understanding graduating with unmanageable debt, which is a number that we can get our arms around as we think about working closely with institutions to address this and think about policy solutions. Commissioner, anything you want to add there?
So that's one in particular that I'm going to come back to the board and about, especially leading up to legislative session. So we're going to go into who are the students who are graduating with unmanageable debt. What do we know about their backgrounds? What do we know about their programs? Are there places that might be sensitive to different kinds of policy interventions? Like there are occupations that we know we need paid that are going to have lower average wages. Early childhood education. We need more early childhood education. If we have a problem around debt with early childhood education, it's like exactly the kind of thing where we might urge the legislature to authorize the board to expand the scope of our loan repayment program. That we can bring these, so we can help close these gaps. So we will continue to dig into the state of it. As Melissa said, so good news, bad news. The bad news is that we have any students who are graduating with number we can wrap our arms around. Where's that variance going to be? Policy intervention.
So finally, regarding research development and innovation, as you'll recall, we have two goals in this area, one focused on increasing private and federal research expenditures, and one focused on increasing research doctoral graduates. Next slide. Here in our baseline year of 2020, for the first measure focused on research expenditures, we were at $3.5 billion, with a goal of increasing that by $1 billion by 2030. That puts our goal at $4.5 billion in private and federal research expenditures. Meeting this goal would place Texas among the leading states in obtaining those competitive research dollars. For our research doctoral graduate goal of 7,500, for our baseline year of 2020, we had 5,458 graduates. Commissioner?
So I do want to highlight on the investments in research. So there are going to be robust conversations legislative session about how the state continues to invest in emerging research, and so that's going to be another area that back to the board about how we can best make the case for the importance of these kinds of state investments for helping to draw down sponsored federal and private. So the federal sponsored research is going to underwrite the majority of basic research at our and the private sponsored research will primarily be focused on completion of those innovations and to different products that. But there are strong correlations there, especially like in federal sponsored research, where there's strong correlations between levels of sponsored research and real and equity. For example, in the zip codes around our emerging research and research. So we could have a historic opportunity for the state to make strategic investments, especially in those emerging research and I want to work with the board so that we can make the strongest possible case in support of our institutions investments that will help us draw down these kinds of sponsored research dollars.
So Melissa, does the $3.5 billion, is that all research in the state of Texas or just in public universities? Does that include private university research dollars or just public?
Lori, I believe it's all, but we can confirm that.
And I would think we would track all because state benefits from research dollars directly or indirectly.
Great question, and we can confirm that, Mr. Wilson. Next slide. To wrap up, so we're in the process of finalizing both a longer form version of the plan and technical documentation for the metrics, which we'll anticipate releasing later this fall. Additionally, we'll be continuing our stakeholder engagement work that has informed every aspect of this plan with institutional leaders in the coming months as we continue to refine our understanding of the data at the institutional level. And as the Commissioner mentioned, continue to work to develop dashboards within the public data portal and the privileged data portal, allowing institutions to drill down more deeply into their own data. Lori, anything to add by way of closing?
As we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to thank Dr. Troutman and his extraordinary team at the University of Texas System, who have been our design partners on this work, as well as our internal data team under the leadership of Kara Larkin-Skinner, Melissa Humphreys, and two of our really key participants from our and leaders, data leaders internally, Elizabeth Shivers and Chris Daugherty. As the Commissioner said, Texas is the first state to condition our goals on this methodology, and so we are very much on the frontier, and it's very new ground. We don't have a playbook that we can draw on, and so it's been a very collaborative process with Dr. Troutman and the UT System team, and we're very grateful both for our internal expertise that's been developed along the way, as well as the talented team that Dr. Troutman has brought to this project.
One question real quick. Since we're talking about advancing Texas economy, and then you're talking about adding $1 billion in terms of the research and adding PhD graduate, things like that nature, that would be a great idea. But in terms of kind of measuring how competitive we are, is it possible to kind of compare with other states? If we add $1 billion, how close we are compared to California. Massachusetts, are we really in the competitive race, or still we have a gap, and how we going to close the gap, and what's the plan in the future that will really become very competitive? So maybe that will be a great data that help us to kind of like map out our step in the future.
Dr. Troutman, thank you for you and your leadership and your staff and group. Would you like to say a few words?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chairman. It's just been a wonderful experience working with the coordinating board on this effort. I just want to emphasize that this is the first state that's really taking this on to really think about the cost of attendance and the student investment piece and making sure that we provide a credential of value for all students in the state of Texas. So it's been exciting. I think it's just the beginning. By this framework will allow us to ask so many more interesting and complex questions so that we can meet the needs of our parents and students out there in Texas. So thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to collaborate with the coordinating board.
Thank you.
Members, does anyone have any questions? If not, we move to agenda item 5B, was approved on the consent calendar. Agenda item 5C is an update on data modernization initiative. Ms. Lori Fay, Deputy Commissioner of Data Analytics Innovation, will provide a presentation and will be available to answer any questions. This item is for information only.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And good morning, members and Mr. Chairman. Lori Fye, Deputy Commissioner for Data Analytics and Innovation, and I'm pleased to be here again today to share our quarterly update on the agency's data modernization initiative with you. Next slide, please. As you may recall, the commissioners actually set this vision out shortly after becoming commissioner in late 2019. And this vision to equip our stakeholders with actionable insight has continued to be our North Star as we've pursued planning and implementation activities over the last about 18 months. We are to the point now where this effort will become even more visible to our external stakeholders. And so we're evolving our approach to communications in order to foster better stakeholder understanding. So the slide that you're looking at today looks differently than the one that you've seen in the past. Our goals contain all the strands of work that they always have. We're just streamlining the way we communicate about this effort so that, and its many moving parts. In short, our three goals are these: to redesign the infrastructure, expand our offerings, and embed continuous improvement into the ways in which we manage and provision our data. So we're very excited about this next phase as we're moving into the more specific stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. This next phase actually also includes firmly establishing the why for this initiative. So if you think about it, this is really sort of talking about the plumbing in your house, which is really not that fascinating for most people outside of plumbers. And so what we really want to be able to do is actually establish the important why for this effort. And as you may know, and as we have continued to talk, there were a number of issues that we sought to address. First and foremost, we've had vintage technology at work in the agency, and that's resulted in many manual processes that take a huge amount of time. So we have very talented internal staff members who are data experts, but they spend a lot of their time actually manually processing data today. In the new, with this new back-end infrastructure, we'll actually be able to deploy their skills to a much higher and better use on things like credentials of value and its many opportunities that it provides. You can also see that we're working to articulate key benefits to a wide range of stakeholders. So as you well know, the coordinating board serves a wide array of stakeholders. Our institution reporting officials are a critical component. They're the ones who actually provide the data to us. Our institutional research partners, our presidents and chancellors, our student success leaders. There are a whole students and families, a wide range of stakeholders that we need to be able to connect with and articulate benefits this new approach and these new data offerings to those different stakeholders. And so we're very excited about this opportunity to begin to do that. Next slide. So back to things you are familiar with. This is the very dense slide that covers a lot of territory. But again, this is not necessarily for you to know every detail, but it does give you a good, pretty granular sense for the kind of work that's gotten accomplished. There are a few things that I want to highlight for you on this slide that are major accomplishments recently. We've completed internal testing on what will ultimately be two user-facing products, data deliverables. The initial dashboards for enrollment and certificates and degrees awarded, and the initial financial aid data system submission portal. So these will ultimately be user-facing. We've completed internal user testing, which is a significant milestone on the way to launch of these two products. Another major initiative major accomplishment that you'll hear more about tomorrow is the signing of the first ever tri-agency data sharing agreement. This is really foundational to our data governance work, and we're very excited to have accomplished that. Again, I think you'll hear more about that tomorrow. That sets a new stage for our work across the partner agencies in the Tri-Agency Workforce Initiative, and also establishes a centralized process and inventory to record the sharing of data, the sharing and use of data across the agencies. So a really exciting step forward for us. Next step, next slide, please. And I saved the best for last. If you know me, you know I love show and tell. So I wanted to give you a sneak peek at the new websites that will be coming in the next few months. What you see on the left is a new landing page for our data website. As you know, if you go to our websites, and as our stakeholders and internal and external have told us, our websites have been very difficult to navigate. And so we've been at work on a complete revamp of both our main data websites as well as the agency site. So the one on the left is the new landing page for the data website. On the right is a landing page for the new agency website. So refreshed brand, much more intuitive navigation, easier to find what you're looking for, an improved search function, the list goes on and on. So we're very excited about that. Our communications team has been working diligently with the leadership of Marjorie Barrett to actually bring these things to life, and we could not be more excited for the launch of those. And that concludes my update, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I want to say, Ms. Fye, thank you for that last part. We've been working on that. That's been a high priority for the board and really for all our stakeholders. And it's, we have a lot of great data, a lot of great information, but I think getting to the access point and getting to what you're looking for is very key. Anything else, you can be in a course and so much information in, but really you want to hone in on what you need. Work by Marjorie and the communications department and your department. So on that, we're looking forward to seeing the new site.
We are very excited about getting to launch on those. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everybody will be delighted.
When is the launch date?
We expect it later this fall. So there are a number of moving parts that have to come together in order to make that happen. So we're hoping October, November at the latest to have that up and running.
Are there any more questions? Not. We move to agenda item 5D is consideration and possible action to approve and amending the staff augmentation technology service contract pursuant to the Rule 1.16 Government Code Chapter 2155 with the Salmon Consulting Incorporated to increase funding including exceeding $5 million and extending the contract from September 30, 2022 to September 30, 2023 for a contract working directly on the Data Modernization Initiative project and backfill position for the Data Modernization Staff Augmentation Project. Members, you have supplement material for this printed on golden rod paper. Ms. Lori Fay, Deputy Commissioner for Data Analytics and Innovation, will present this item and be available for any question, Ms. Fay.
Much, Mr. Anwar. At the April 2022 board meeting, the board approved contracting for up to $7.65 million to extend contracts with Damon Consulting for contract staff for both that are both supporting the data modernization initiative and providing backfill support for the agency's internal information and systems and services team. Those contracts, those amendments did extend that date, the original end date from June to September of 22, and those approved amendments have been executed. Today, we are requesting approval to extend these contracts further to allow additional work to be completed over the coming year. The requested changes would extend the end date from September of 22 to September 30th of 2023, and would amend the contract amounts by a total of up to $2.85 million. These changes would bring the total amount of the contracts to a maximum of $10.5 million, and I do want to point out that this would extend the contract for staff working directly on the data modernization to just over $7 million. This contract amount exceeds the $5 million threshold established under Rule 1.16 and therefore requires board approval. These contracts are funded by the Governor's Emergency Education Relief, or GEAR funds, and this extension and amendment align with the September 2023 deadline for expenditure of the final tranche of those GEAR funds that are allocated to this effort. Staff recommends approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So the increased amount is just extending more than the 12 months, or is it just cost of services are going up next year?
No, it's associated with the extension of the time.
So in our packet, it's got $6 million, total project cost $6 million. Materials.
Yes, the original blue page was an error. Wrong cost.
Is any of this sensitive to our move to the new facility? Is that part of this, or?
No, should not be. The move, I mean, we're anticipating some potential disruption for the internal team from the move, but not, but the contract staff should not be impacted.
Members, are there any questions? Members, is there any motion to approve amending the two staff augmentation and technology service contract pursuant to Rule 1.16 Government Code, Chapter 2155, Damon Consulting Incorporated, as presented by Ms. to increase the funding, including exceeding $5 million and extending the contract to September 30, 2023 for contracts working directly on the data modernization initiative project and to backfill positions for the data modernization project. I have a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? If not, those in favor say aye.
Mr. Anwar, just for clarification, it's
$10,600,000.
yes, as a sub.
So I have a motion and a second, please. Any question? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone say against? Say no. Motion passes.
To make sure everyone online, Mr. Gaunt, Mr. Clemmer, can y'all hear us pretty well?
We got the general theme, I think. There is some portions of it that's being cut out.
Okay, we will take a look at that. Thank you, Mr. Clemmer.
We move on to agenda item 5E is consideration possible action to approve amending the service contract pursuant to Government Code Chapter 2155 with MDRC by extending the contract from June 30, 2022 to April 30, 2023 and adding additional funds to extend and enhance MDRC's ongoing randomization controlled trial evaluation of the Texas Transfer Grants Pilot Program. Members have supplement material printing on the goldenrod paper for this item. Dr. Charles Contro Plus, Assistant Commissioner for Student Aid Program is available. Any questions? Member, are there any questions? Not, members, is there a motion to approve amending the service contract pursuant to Government Code Chapter 2155 with MDRC to extend April 30, 2023 and add additional funds to extend and enhance MDRC ongoing randomization controlled trial evaluation of the Texas Grant Pilot Program? So a motion and a second.
Mr. Anwar, the Commissioner had a comment real quick. Just a comment for the board and for the audience about what this is. So we received GEAR funds specifically to address an issue that we'd identified, transfer students. So the legislature allocated funding that we estimate we're able to serve about 68% of the students who are eligible for Texas. Students who are renewals are prioritized. That means not every student who's eligible for Texas grant, especially has. So we did receive some funding from the legislature specifically to focus on the transfer. That one-time allocation of funds wasn't enough to fund every transfer student. So what we've organized is for two cohorts of students with MDRC, that's evaluation firms, do a randomized control trial so that we can out what are the treatment effects of fighting transfer students. So that way we'll have a better sense of how much of a difference it made for the board to be able to provide targeted grants. Really appreciate Chad and his team and our external partners. So this is not how state government usually works to organize carefully designed randomized control trials around the impact of financial aid. And so I just want to put that in the larger context of sort of. We can continue.
Okay.
I think you called for a motion, right?
Do I have a motion and a second?
Motion?
So move.
Please.
We had a motion for Mr. Clemmer, a second for Mr. Torrance, what I heard.
Those in favor say aye, and those who oppose say no.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Agenda item 5F, consideration of possible action to approve entering into Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funded Integrity contract totaling more than $30 million with various general academic institutions in support towards Excellence, Access, and Success Texas Grant Program. Dr. Charles Control, Assistant Commissioner for the Student Financial Aid Program, is available to answer any question. Members, is there any questions? Members, is there any motion to approve into GER funded integrity contracts totaling no more than $30 million with various general academic and institution to support Texas grant program? Do I have a motion and a second, please?
So move.
Second.
Second, the discussion. Those in favor say aye. Those who oppose say no.
Aye.
Motion passes. 5G was approved on the consent calendar. Item number 6 is adjournment. Do I have a motion and a second, please? Second. Members, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those who oppose say no. Motion passes and we are adjourned. Thank you.